Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on how to get a FTSE board role as the HR executive, hosted by Nurole. Just to say at the start, we are recording this session to share with those people who couldn't make it today. I'm Carla Devereux, and I will be chairing this conversation. We'll have a 2-minute introduction from Susie Cummings, Nurole founder. We'll then introduce our panel and then start a Q&A with some of the questions that were submitted during attendee registration. The aim of today's session is for you to come away with an understanding of how to get more success in your applications, what boards want from candidates, and what the transition from exec to non-exec might be like. On your screen, you will see 3 buttons at the bottom: chat, Q&A, and raise your hand. We would encourage you to use the Q&A button, where you can answer questions or upvote questions from others that you would like to see answered. So now I'm going to pass over to Susie, who can give us a brief introduction. So over to you, Susie.
Thanks, Carla. So I'm Susie Cummings, Nurole's founder. And firstly, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. By way of background, I was the traditional headhunter for 30 years until 2014, when I had one of those light bulb moments. And I thought, surely in this digital age, there must be a better way to headhunt than that traditional way of having about 5 cups of coffee a day and getting totally caffeined out. So we built a platform, and today we have over 60,000 members in nearly 100 countries. And we've placed over 2,500, of whom nearly 800 we placed last year. A quick story just to try and illustrate how the platform works. We were working with LBCM, Lloyds Bank Corporate Markets, the ring fence bank, and they were looking for a diverse candidate who brought expertise of acquiring digital customers. We put the description up on the platform, we pressed the button, and immediately 500 people with relevant expertise were notified. Someone called Eve Henriksen, who was at that stage head of online at Tesco, applied for the role. She was shortlisted. James Lupton, who was our client, he's LBCM's chairman, called Dave Lewis, then CEO at Tesco, to take a reference. And Dave said, "How on earth did you manage to find Eve? She's beneath the traditional headhunter's radar screen." To which James replied, because he'd been briefed by me, "We use Nurole, who can reach those candidates other search firms can't reach." And what that means is you, the organization, get exactly the same service from Nurole as you would from a traditional headhunter. You get a long list of 10 or so and help to choose which 4 or 5 to interview. And you, the individual, don't have to trog around the 40 different board level headhunters in London. You just sign up, we notify you of matching roles, and you decide for yourself, is this something I'm a great match for? Is this one I can create capacity for? And traditional headhunters simply don't have our access to such a fantastically wide and high quality and diverse pool of candidates. They take longer, charge way more than we do, and they're rife with unconscious bias. So the main difference is not that we're cheaper and faster, but that our long lists are stronger and more diverse because of our process. And just to illustrate the functional diversity of our placements, it was actually 777 we placed in last year in 22. 185 had a sort of CEO general management background, 157 had a finance background, and 121 had an HR background. And that was on to 33 compensated and 86 pro bono roles. So hopefully we can help those of you who are looking for a board role.
Great, thank you, Susie. Today we're also joined by Barry Hoffman and Meriel Lenfestey, who have kindly given up their time to share their expertise on this call. So thank you both. I'm now going to ask you to introduce yourself. Barry, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I'm Barry Hoffman. Up until the end of March, I was the Chief People Officer at Landsec, a FTSE 100 real estate company, and before that for 11 years I was Chief People Officer at Computer Centre, FTSE 250, and I now have a fullish portfolio on 4 or 5 different boards, and 2 of which have come through Nurole, and I have also recommended Nurole to people as well, so yeah, happy customer.
Thank you, Barry. Meriel?
Yeah, Meriel Lenfestey. Thank you very much for inviting me here. So my background is not in HR, so you may wonder why I'm here, but I think the reason I'm here is because I have a sort of slightly untraditional background in getting into the non-exec world. Because my background is design, so digital design and technology. And it's not, I've never met anyone else on the board who's had that background, so I think that's probably the relevant point. And I am also a happy customer of Nurole. So I've been a candidate. I was one of that nearly 800 people last year who got a role through Nurole, which was a role with Boku, to be remuneration committee chair. So there's a kind of HR element to that, if you like. But I've also been on the other side of things. So I've recruited a candidate through Nurole for Jersey Telecom, and that was very much a technical expert that we were looking for at that point. But yes, I've seen it from both sides.
Great. Thank you. Now we will start on some questions. We're going to break it down into two topics at the start. The first topic is the role of the NED, and the second topic is the application process. So the first question on the role of the NED, what do you see or what do you perceive as the role of the non-exec on boards, and how does this differ by type of board? So who would like to go first?
I can go first if you like.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so the role of a non-exec is very much to be part of a team. So you are part of a team of people who is the board, and there's the executives and the non-executives there. It's one of the things I love about being a non-exec director, actually, that I'm very much one of a team. So I've run organizations in the past, but this is very different. This is about being kind of equals, if you like, with this board, working together. And your collective responsibility with the executives is to create the strategy with the stakeholders in mind, with the shareholders in mind, with the customers in mind, with the market in mind, etc., understanding that full context. And then as a non-exec, to equip the executive to deliver it. So it's not the non-exec's job to deliver it, but it's definitely the non-exec's job to try and make sure that it is deliverable, to support the executive in delivering it and to monitor how it's making progress.
I would support that. I think being part of a team is a really rewarding and satisfying part of being a non-executive director. For me, it's very much eyes on, hands off. I'm recently out of my executive career, so I do remember very vividly what it's like when I've experienced a good non-exec who is absolutely eyes on, hands off, and some who are slightly more interested in what's going on day to day, which can be sometimes get in the way of doing your executive role. So I tried to keep that in mind very much. For me, it's all about support and challenge in equal measure as well. I think being an HR professional, I think a lot of us have a natural tendency to do that, to ask challenging and supportive, constructive questions. And asking questions is probably the most important skill for me of being a non-exec director. I'm thinking all the time, there's almost like a reflex, a muscle, which is sort of dive into the detail, how can I solve this? And then immediately that kicks in, I'm thinking, right, no, step back, ask questions. What does that mean? What's stopping you from doing something? What obstacles do you face? What kind of support would you like? Those sorts of questions are the things that, for me, being a non-exec is all about doing that. So eyes on, hands off, support, challenge, ask questions.
The thing I'd add to that, I guess, is that is certainly true across most of the organizations I'm a non-exec for now, but I have in the past been a non-exec for organizations much earlier in their journey. So startups or not-for-profit organizations for whom you have to be a little bit more hands-on. So you do occasionally have to jump into the detail, but you need to do it very deliberately, very carefully, with the support of your colleagues, and sensitive to that specific context. And it's going to be a case of, for some people, that'll be the kind of non-exec role that they love. That's quite fun to be involved with something that's startup, and you dip in and out, and you kind of get involved deeply in some things, and very much as a sort of scrutiny oversight in other things. But for other people, that's not the way they work at all. It's very much a sort of arm's length role. Personally,
I'd completely agree with that. I've done 2 Royal Charter bodies, both of which sucked me in far more than I'd wanted, took up a lot of time. I've stepped away from both of those. The AIM listed business where I chair REM is sort of halfway between the kind of all-in small business wants more of your time and the really big business that has oodles of people to sort of do everything for you. So yeah, it's definitely a bit different depending on the size and the resources that the business has at its disposal.
Thank you both. Which type of, so actually it's a lovely follow on from that. Which type of board should somebody be considering based on their executive experience?
I don't think I would answer that in the way that you might expect me to answer, because I think the type of board that you go for based on your executive experience is what gives you the most satisfaction. So for me, I was looking for a board where I could be curious, involved in everything, and not just seen as the HR expert, because that was quite frustrating in my executive role, because I'm interested in business in general. So a board where you can fully participate and kind of bring your whole self to the board and run a business. That could be small company, big company, mid-size, listed, not listed. So it sort of depends. I mean, for me, the things that play to my strengths are REM and COSEC type stuff and governance and so on. So that's the type of thing that I was looking for. But above all, I'd say you've got to do something you're interested in. If you're not interested in the business, then it'll come through and you won't really get very far. So be really interested and care about the business that you're going into, and I think that really helps.
I agree. The only thing I'd add is that it's got to be a place that you can see yourself having an impact. So you can see the purpose that you will have in that team. You can see what your background, your skills, your ways of working, your approach are going to bring to it. You need to choose an environment where you can that makes sense. It just feels right sometimes. You know, when I read an advert or I meet a bunch of people, I kind of go, yes, they feel like people I can have an impact when I talk with. The conversation is good. And there are other kinds of people I've interviewed for roles over the years where I've kind of gone, actually, no, I don't think I really add anything. I think they've already got the skills I've got, or I just don't think that my skills would be appreciated and therefore I could not have the impact I wanted. So I would agree. I don't think you can say, well, you know, it's tempting to go down the road of saying, well, it's got to be a people-based organization if you're an HR person, but I don't think that's the case. I think that HR professionals and HR leaders have a set of skills that is not just about HR. And I think it's about identifying what they are and working out where they can be applied to have an impact.
Thank you. What are boards looking for from HR executives?
Well, I have to say this really surprised me. I was appointed to the board of Actual Experience PLC back in whenever it was, March or something, I can't remember now. And I'd interviewed for a few things, and I've got a few things aside from that. And I turned up thinking I'm really clever, I do HR, so they're going to ask me loads of HR questions. And actually they weren't asking me those sorts of questions at all. What they really wanted to know was, did I understand business? What did they think I could bring to the board? You know, and they were kind of the transferable skills, the curiosity, the challenge, and some of the HR stuff that we do, I suppose the softer skills of coaching and supporting, challenging, they were interesting. But if I'd started talking about, you know, I don't know, a skills marketplace or performance management systems, no one was interested in that. And actually interesting, this is just my personal experience, even going for REM roles, REM chairs and so on, quite a lot of chairs where REM's sort of secondary. We want someone who's going to bring this to the board, and yeah, you'll do REM as well. So great, you've done a bit of it before. But the mistake I made, and it was a mistake, I think, initially, was to go with, I'm really clever, I've done loads of REM, I've done FTSE 100 REM, and I've done this. And people weren't so interested in that. So I think some of the softer skills of listening and challenging and supporting were what boards were interested in, and what and how you could bring the customer in as well. That was the other thing, that all the businesses that I talked to were interested in how I understood customer and the customer environment and what could I bring. And some were interested in my network as well, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't think I've recruited a lot of non-execs over the years. I've been a non-exec for 10 years now. So, and I don't think I've ever written a brief or began looking for an HR person. You know, we've certainly had people with an HR background apply and have appointed people with that background, but it's never been what we've been looking for. So absolutely, totally agree with Barry. It's a softer set of things. And I think again, understanding why I'm in this conversation, I think, so my background is very much about customer and design for customers. So I think what you've just said, Barry, is absolutely right. That I think that there is that softer empathy, understanding, just seeing the picture from a slightly different angle from everyone else in the room. That's what they will want to see evidence of in anybody, not just an HR person walking through the door or in their application. And it needs to shine. It needs, because that's what will make you stand out, because you won't just be in a set of kind of applications of people who are from an HR background. So you need to kind of work out what it is that is special about you.
Yeah, and I honestly, I don't mind admitting I got it completely wrong right at the beginning, because I honestly thought that you look at the narrative, organizations need people and culture. It's super important. I mean, you only have to see what's going on in the news with CBI and other organizations, and you kind of go, oh, they definitely need a people person. I'm a shoo-in. And that's just absolutely wrong, completely wrong on every level. So for all of you chief people officers or HR folk out there, I think it requires a lot of really deep thinking about what you bring to a board and what your skills and capabilities are. And don't make the mistake that I made. But I figured it out, by the way, so it's fine.
Thank you. Has the need for HR execs on a board changed in the last 5 years?
So I would say it's a big fat no. It's always been the same, but people are only just starting to wake up to it. Notwithstanding all the things we said before, I think there's just a bigger spotlight on governance, culture, employee voice, employee activism. That's just more than it ever was before. I don't think that need personally underlying has ever changed. I mean, it's always been really important. I would say that, wouldn't I? Being a chief people officer, but that's what I think.
I think there's a far greater understanding of diversity, and I don't mean that in terms of gender or ethnicity. I mean in terms of background, experience, ways of thinking. So I think that there has been a change in appreciation for skills like HR and design in recruiting candidates that has changed over the last 5 years. Definitely, I've seen it change. So I was a very, very, very unusual person applying for board roles 7-8 years ago. I'm less unusual now. don't say that in my applications.
So what should someone expect in the first 90 days of a FTSE board role? This was the question that was presented to us, but we'll broaden it out. Any board role.
Well, Meriel, you're probably a bit more used to it now than me, but this is, I've only just left executive life. So my first tip to anybody is try and think about sequencing and timing. I mean, you can take 2 on at once, but the onboarding is quite intense. I've just discovered. Also, I now no longer have access to the infrastructure that I had before, the amazing PA that I had, and all the other things that go with it. So there's a bit of adjustment to make. So your first 90 days, not only is it quite intense because there's a lot of onboarding and meeting people and getting, doing a lot of listening and absorbing and reading papers and all that kind of stuff, but you're also doing it without the comfort blanket of your executive infrastructure and sort of support network. But it's been the other thing I would say about the first 90 days, fantastic fun. I mean, meeting people and feeling a sense of belonging and community and being part of a business, that's been really brilliant, and learning so much from an experienced chair. I've always kind of thought the differential between non-exec and chair is quite big in terms of the pay, particularly in the main market. when you work for a good chair, wow, it's you can learn an awful lot, and I'm certainly learning tons at the minute.
Yeah, no, the rest of the board, including obviously the chair, but the others as well, and the executives should be helping a lot through that 90 days. They should be making an awful lot of introductions. They should be opening doors for you to talk to people. So a bad appointment would be one where you're kept very much at arm's length and not allowed to meet people around the organisation. And a good one would be one where you're encouraged to, and you're taken out and you're shown the sites and introduced to the kind of key stakeholders and people across the organisation, left to right, bottom, etc. So you need to have a chance to really get under the skin of it, to get beyond where you were in the interview process, which was probably a lot of informed but reasonably educated, I hope, guesses. Put them aside and work out really what's happening. So that first 90 days is about just learning an awful lot.
Thank you. The next section we're going to talk about is the application section.
Carla, can I just ask that in the Q&A bit, there's a question that's come up, which I think I wouldn't mind answering if you don't mind, because it says, at what point in a career should one start to think about applying for a non-executive role? And I've got an answer for that, which I've stolen. I'm not going to take credit for it. I've stolen it from someone else. So I think you have to ask yourself two questions. One is, have I had enough? And two is, have I got enough? And for me, that was how I decided, because I'd kind of had enough of my executive career. I knew I was at 55, I wanted to move on. And have I got enough? And I'd done quite well out of one of the businesses I'd worked for, so I had enough. So I think it's a really personal thing about when's the right time to start. I'm not sure there is an answer for anybody, but I think if you can answer the questions, have you had enough and have you got enough? I think that's a good starting point. Sorry to interrupt, but I saw that on the thing and I thought, well, I could answer.
I have a slightly different perspective, I suppose. I don't disagree with that, but I guess I just come at it from a different angle, which is that I think being a non-exec is a job. It is being a portfolio non-exec is certainly for me, is a full-time job, more than a full-time job. So for me, it wasn't about, have I had enough? It was very much, I want to change. I want a different way of working. I want to be able to influence at a different level. I want to be asking different questions. So it was a career shift rather than a sort of step to retirement for me. But then when I did it, I was 43, 44 when I first became a non-exec. So I guess that maybe that difference is explained by the age.
It's definitely hard work though. I'd agree with that.
Yep.
I've hardly got time to play golf.
Brilliant. And we'll come back to some of those other questions at the end. And I see there is a question in chat as well, so we will get to that too. On an application, or talking about how people present, how should you position yourself when applying for a non-executive role?
The most important thing, and I see this time and time again, I've seen so many applications where people have perhaps reached a point in their career where their ego is a little bit bigger than their skill set, and they kind of think they don't need to do the research and they don't need to be eloquent about what it is that they bring to the role. They think if they just put down their magical CV with all of the wonderful roles that they've had on it, they're going to be lapped up. And that isn't the case. That really isn't the case. There are very few people for whom that would be the case, that their name and their background is enough. So do the research, think very, very, very deeply about what it is that, how your approach, how your soft skills, as well as your harder skills fit this specific opportunity, not opportunity in general, but this specific opportunity.
I would completely agree with that. I think approaching an application, or especially on Nurole, which is sort of structured in a slightly different way from going to meet a headhunter, I would say it's at least half a day to sit down and really think about it and construct the narrative that you want to put forward. This isn't the kind of sort of bash over a CV sort of thing and you'll get the job. It's really hard work, and then doing the research as well also takes a good slug of time. And doing your due diligence is the other thing. And, you know, how do you kind of go about this? Well, sometimes it's a bit, be careful what you wish for, because not every business, you know, is necessarily in a great place. If you're going for an AIM listed business, it might be a scale up startup, it might be you have to do fundraise, it might be in any kind of state. You know, there are companies which you think are great and they're going through difficult times. I mean, made.com, you know, an example. So it isn't, you have to kind of think of, well, yes, once you get in, it's a bit like learning to drive, isn't it? It's like once you pass your test, then you learn to drive. So once you've got on to a board, that's when the work starts. And so sort of how you approach this, you have to really think about it carefully, do your due diligence and really work hard at it, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I mean, both as a headhunter and at Nurole, the most common reason for turning people down, you ring up and you say, look, you know, you've got great experience, really relevant, but the person that got it had just done a lot more research than you. And they showed it, whether it's in the application, you make reference to the organization, or in the interviews. And I mean, I completely agree about doing that research up front.
I agree. And I would reiterate that by saying that I've had clients say, and this is on Nurole, turn around and say they don't seem like they've looked into us, they make no reference to us in their application. How do we know they're really interested in us, or how do we know it's a copy and paste? So these are questions that are being asked of us in a long listing meeting. So it's worth being aware of it.
Yeah, and of course it's done realistically. So, you know, the panel, the interview panel, the organization knows that you're not inside. So they knows that you can't know the problem that happened last week, but they do expect you to just have a little bit of insight into the industry to understand the kinds of challenges that organizations in that space may be facing, what might be happening in the future, etc. And anything that happened in the past, you know, so if there was a big news story that was in the past, you would be expected to have found that. So yeah.
What might need to change from my exec CV to be considered for a NED role?
Quite a lot.
Yes. This evolved for me over a period of probably 18 to 24 months, where when I started out, I think it was poor, and then it got to be quite good. And it has to be more succinct, and people are, I think, less interested. I mean, Meriel, you'll have seen more CVs than me in you know, hiring non-execs, but I think people are less interested in what you've done and more interested in how you did it, what problems you solved, what you learned, what, you know, kind of what you could bring to the next gig, as opposed to, you know, how clever you were in the previous one. That's the sense I get, and that's how I've tried to make my CV.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, you're not applying for an executive role in HR. So anything that you would put in to try and get an executive role in HR is probably needs to be described in a different way. So, I mean, you're not going to change the dates and the titles of the job titles and the organizations you work for. Obviously, that still has a place. There's a set of credentials around that, and that proves that, you know, you have some experience. But the narrative around that is a very different narrative. So what is it about that role that is relevant to the things that a non-exec does? And what I do on my CV is I've got a big section at the beginning of it, which describes me and my approach, my ways of thinking, which is lifted out of all of my kind of track record. And it's very much about the areas that I enjoy working, very kind of broad brush, the sectors that I've been in, my personal strengths, the things that excite me. So that, again, it takes a lot of thought to work out what it is that's particularly relevant to you. So mine would be a very different one than Barry's, I'm sure. But that's really useful. Also very helpful when you come to fill in the answer the questions on Nurole as well, because it's that higher level thinking that you need to put into answering those questions. It's the same kind of train of thought.
I mean, if the people on the call work in listed businesses and they have friendly boards and board chairs, I mean, I wouldn't be frightened to ask for a bit of help. As you know, what would you look for if you were hiring a new board member? This is my CV. Where would you point out on here what's not so good and what does work? I think it's definitely an iterative process. You can't expect to sort of, you know, finish your CV with a flourish and that's it. It's all done. It really does take a lot of time, I think.
I've done that for a lot of people, and it's a really good point. Do ask. It doesn't need to be your own board. Anybody who's been involved in the process. You know, I've had lawyers come to me, I've had accountants come to me. You know, the more traditional routes perhaps into being a non-exec, and their CVs are very often what I would describe as wrong as well. You know, they all need to just take a different look at it through a different lens, and you can kind of rip it all up and put it back together again in a way that makes more sense.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I know we are on a 35-minute webinar. We might stretch it for a few more minutes if that's okay with everyone. There are some very good questions. I'm going to actually double up, and we have one final question that came in from attendees before the session, which was where to find board roles. But I'm also going to look at one of the questions that was asked in the Q&A. So we'd love some top tips to get your very first paid non-exec role. I have non-remunerated trustee positions. So where to find your board roles and how to get your first paid one.
Well, obviously, I'm going to say Nurole. That's the obvious. And the traditional headhunters, which is, you know, a lot harder to get airtime with. I mean, it depends who you are, I guess, but generally it's, I mean, those of us that work in HR, particularly in main listed FTSE 100, FTSE 250 business, we don't normally have trouble getting hold of people in the traditional search firms because they have an interest in talking to us. But you kind of want to talk to folk in the board practices. They will have remunerated roles and network a lot. Networking doesn't get you a job, but it definitely gets you to hear about stuff, and then you can take it one step further from there. There are a couple of other outplacement organizations or career focused organizations that are helpful in finding sort of leads and stuff. I tell you what I didn't do is I didn't sign up to some of these paid services. There are a couple of paid services around where you register and you join, pay a fee, become a member. That I get the sense that aggregators and they kind of scrape jobs from all sorts of places. I didn't do that. I've also networked a lot with boards and organizations where I'm really interested, and maybe something will come of it. It might be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, or it might never happen at all. But because it's interesting, and I'm happy to do it, and I like it. There's a couple of big FTSE sort of search firms, recruitment firms, kind of peripheral to HR. It's interesting, and I know quite a few of the board members, and when something comes up, I may or may not be contacted. Who knows? But that's how I've approached it. You have to spread your net far and wide. It is definitely, if you kind of apply for something and hope that you're going to get it, I think you might be disappointed, because it's definitely a bit of a law of averages. You have to do lots of applications and suffer quite a bit of rejection. So if you're a sensitive soul, you need to bear that in mind.
The only thing I'd add, I agree with all of that. The only thing I'd add is when I started, I took myself off and did a course. So I did the Financial Times Non-Executive Director Diploma. You could also do the IOD course. And that just gave me the confidence to know what I was letting myself in for, that I really understood what it was about, and also introduced me into a network and gave my CV a sort of immediate appeal to people who received it, because I proved that I was enthusiastic and proved I understood it. And certainly the FT had a kind of jobs board. My first non-exec role was through the FT jobs board.
I think there's a twin track of what's happening in real life, your applications, your rejections and acceptances and all that kind of stuff, and your confidence. And I think you have to keep the confidence one going really strong, even when the application one is not going so strong. The more you network, the more you talk to people, keep the confidence up, then things will come. Especially if you're learning and developing and honing your CV and honing your sort of personal narrative and keeping your confidence going I think it's quite an important thing. It was for me anyway. It's quite an important thing throughout.
Thank you. I will try and get to one, maybe two more questions. What are some of the key questions you would ask yourself or the interviewers when considering a board beyond the obvious? So, for example, of a board that interests you, what questions help dig into the realities of the board?
Well, I mean, being an HR person, I'm genuinely quite interested in dynamics, board dynamics. How does the board work? What's the style of the chair? How do people feel about the board? And on the whole, I ask lots of questions about business because I'm generally quite nosy and quite curious about how the business is run and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered that particularly well. Sorry.
It's quite a hard one to answer, actually. It should be an easy question to answer, but it's not. Because I mean, there are obvious questions in terms of, you know, who does what and the time involved and all the rest of it, but that's not the point. I think it's less about questions and more about conversation. So the people that I've hired and been most confident about hiring are the ones where I've had a really good conversation with them, where the interview's gone completely off the rails because we've just had a good conversation. It wasn't that they asked questions. It wasn't, you know, and it's the same in the application process as well. It's less, there's sort of a feeling. That's why it's a hard question to answer. Genuinely, you kind of get a feeling.
You have to have a point of view as well. I think particularly chairs are looking for a point of view. I mean, it's not like a job interview where you're just waiting for the next question and then you can say how clever you've been and how you've done it before. You have to really have a point of view, read the FT, read the Economist, know about stuff, and then you can have that really good conversation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
The last one, how do you quantify impact as a non-executive director?
Another hard question.
Yeah.
As an individual non-exec director, I don't think you can. I mean, you genuinely are one of a team. And even collectively as a board, you are one of a team of people who are constantly changing. You're a kind of living, breathing organism. You know, you do a term and you might do another term and you rotate off and other people are coming in and going. And this is not a job that you do for ego. You don't do it for personal impact at that big scale. I mean, you know if the organization is achieving its vision, you know if the strategy is kind of following the right path or adjusts if it needs to follow. So you get a sense of it feels right and we're going in the right direction and we were able to handle that difficult situation and we're challenging each other but not falling out. And you know, the board dynamics thing is probably actually the answer that I know when my boards are going well or when I'm being a good non-exec or a good chair, because we're making progress through difficult situations without falling out, because they can be difficult conversations.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Thank you. So I am really conscious that there are some questions and some excellent questions people have asked. What we will do is we will answer, for any unanswered questions, we will write an answer, we'll publish it and we'll email it to all of the attendees today. We'll also send you a recording of today's conversation so you can look at us again, and we'll also send you information on joining Nurole's board committee, so where you can have conversations with experienced NEDs, and hopefully it would be an opportunity to learn and network from each other. So I will pop in some details on that into the email as well. And of course, for those of you who are here today and who are not a Nurole member, you can request an invitation from our website. So please feel free to do that, and we will let you join the platform. So if you'd like to do that, and we will look at it towards the end of this week. But thank you all for your time today, Meriel, Barry. We really appreciate the time you've spent with us today and the time you've spent preparing ahead of these conversations. Your insights are invaluable, and we are really grateful. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Take care.